Hello and welcome back to our study in the book of Job. If you have been taking this journey with us from the beginning, we want you to know we really appreciate it. And if this is your first time joining us, we just want to say to you, welcome aboard. If you want to go back and see the preceding episodes, you can do so at porthuronchurchofchrist.org. That's porthuronchurchofchrist.org, and there you will find all the preceding episodes. Before we get started, I want to comment about the last 3 sessions. If you looked at it, if it looked like my skin was orange, I want you to know, just for the record, that was not a spray tan. We moved our studio to another location and as a result suffered some lighting problems. But now I believe we have that all worked out. I want to go back before we move on into chapter 23 to do a little review in chapter 22 to get us warmed up. In his final speech to Eliphaz, now remember now, this is the 3rd round. This is Eliphaz's final time speaking with Job. And you're going to notice things are going to change in what he has to say. In his final speech, Eliphaz directly accuses Job of specific sins, sinful behaviors, and attitudes which Eliphaz believes God is punishing Job for by means of the suffering he has inflicted on him. He portrays Job as one of the proud rich who profit by exploiting the poor and then arrogantly reject God's claim upon their lives. In this final speech, you will notice more sarcasm and accusatory statements from Eliphaz than in his previous speeches. Remember, this was the nice guy initially. Now he's kind of tired of Job, and he's coming a little bit straight at him. He's going to counter Job's statements in chapter 21 on his claim that God does not judge the wicked by portraying the suffering of Job as living proof that he does. So here's what we're going to hear from Eliphaz in chapter 22. It divides into 3 major sections. The first is the charge of Job against the poor, and that's verses 1 through 11. And then the charge of siding with the wicked, that's verses 12 through 20. And then finally, in 21 through 30, we have the call to repentance. What Eliphaz says is unjustly applied to Job, but also is very true. That when God treats us good, it is not because he is indebted to us. Man's piety is no profit to God. There's no gain. The gains of religion to men are infinitely greater than the losses of it. God is sovereign and who gives no account of his conduct, but he is perfectly wise, just, faithful, good, and merciful. He approves the likeness of his own holiness and delights in the fruits of his spirit. He accepts the thankful services of the humble believer while he rejects the proud claim of the self-confident. In verse number 5, we find these words, "Is not your wickedness great?" That is, it is not an utter presumption and foolishness for a man whose wickedness is undoubtedly so great to presume to enter into a litigation with God. Now, this is Eliphaz talking to Job. Remember, Job has been calling for court to settle his case against God and what God has done to him as he argues his innocence. Eliphaz here assumes it is without question that Job is a great sinner. This charge has not been directly made before. I want you to take note of that. In the past, he and his friends had argued around the idea in general terms and had maintained that one who was a great sinner would be punished for it in this life. And they left it up to Job to catch the hint and apply that to himself. So up to this point, the charge had not been made so openly. But here, Eliphaz is firing his final missiles at Job and argues as if that point could not be disputed. The only proof he has so far as it appears that Job had been afflicted, as they had maintained great sinners would be, and they therefore concluded he must be such. And we have talked about this premise. So here's what it looks like. If God inflicts sinners, and Job has been inflicted by God, it stands to reason Job is a sinner. No facts are referred to, except that he was a great sufferer. And yet, on the grounds of this point, he proceeds to take for granted that Job must have been a man who had maybe taken a pledge for no cause, had refused to give water to the thirsty, had been an oppressor, or all of the sinful deeds he had listed. Now, in chapter 23, we're going to find that Job is going to respond to Eliphaz. So let's make 3 observations regarding Job's reaction to what Eliphaz just said about Job. Although Eliphaz was totally incorrect in his assumptions, Job did not interrupt him and allowed him to finish. When Job speaks, he will not direct his comments directly at Eliphaz, but at God instead. And the third thing we notice is that he knew it was not Eliphaz who would justify him, but the Lord. He longed for God to bring about justice in his case. And although God has not shown up or Job's situation improved, he still put his trust in God to listen to his concerns. To trust God to offer him a response. Verse number 5. He put his trust in God to take seriously his plea for justice in verse number 6. To hear his arguments and clear his record in verse number 7. And now in 8 and 9, Job admitted he couldn't literally see or behold God. So as he replies to Eliphaz, he begins by justifying the intensity of his complaints. First, on the ground of the severity of his sufferings. And secondly, on the ground of his conviction that if God will bring him to an open trial before his tribunal, he would acquit him. And by the way, he complains that God hides himself and cannot be found. He then further complains that God cannot be turned from his purpose by any man, which, in their opinion, is set against Job. If the doctrine of God's sovereignty is supposed to be such a source of strength for his people, the question begs to be answered, then why was Job so frightened by it? Perhaps because his suffering had made him realize that he had no control over his own life, and actually God did. He didn't know about the cosmic wager that has set him up for such tremendous trials, and he feared what might happen next. He trembled before the Creator, yet he knew that his only hope of salvation and restoration remains in the hands of God. Job trusted God, though he could not understand his ways. Now I'm going to go and begin reading in chapter 23. Then Job replied, "Even today my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy in spite of my groaning. If only I knew where to find him. If only I could go to his dwelling. I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would find out what he would answer me and consider what he would say to me. Would he vigorously oppose me? No. He would not press charges against me. There the upright can establish their innocence before him, and there I would be delivered forever from my judge. But if I go to the east, he is not there. If I go to the west, I do not find him. When he is at work in the north, I do not see him. And when he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed his steps. I have kept to his way without turning aside. I have not departed from the commands of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread. But he stands alone, and who can oppose him? He does whatever he pleases. He carries out his decrees against me, and many such plans he still has in store. That is why I am terrified before him. When I think of all this, I fear him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. Yet I am not silenced by the darkness, by the thick darkness that covers my face. So now Job continues in chapter 24 with the examples of a blatant injustice that God allows in the world. And we're going to see that here. He says, why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why must those who know him look in vain for such days? There are those who move boundary stones. They pasture flocks they have stolen. They drive away the orphans' donkeys and take the widow's oxen pledge. They thrust the needy from the path and force all the poor of the land into hiding. Like wild donkeys in the desert, the poor go about their labor of foraging food. The wasteland provides food for their children. They gather fodder in the fields and glean in the vineyards of the wicked. Lacking clothes, they spend the night naked. They have nothing to cover themselves in the cold. They are drenched by mountain rains and hug the rocks for lack of shelter. The fatherless child is snatched from the breast. The infant of the poor is seized for a debt. Lacking clothes, they go about naked. They carry the sheaves, but still go hungry. They crush olives among the terraces. They tread the wine presses, yet suffer thirst. The groans of the dying rise from the city, and their souls of the wounded cry out for help. But God charges no one with wrongdoing. There are those who rebel against the light, who do not know its ways or stay in its path. When daylight is gone, the murderer rises up, kills the poor and needy, and in the night steals forth like a thief. The eye of the adulterer watches for dusk. He thinks, no eye will see me, and he keeps his face concealed. And in the dark, thieves break into houses, but by day they shut themselves in. They want nothing to do with the light. For all of them, midnight is their morning, and they make friends with the terrors of darkness. Yet they are foam on the surface of the water. Their portion of the land is cursed, so that no one goes to the vineyards. As heat and drought snatch away the melted snow, so the grave snatches away those who have sinned. The womb forgets them. The worm feasts on them. The wicked are no longer remembered, but are broken like a tree. They prey on the barren and childish woman, and to the widow they show no kindness. But God drags away the mighty by his power. Though they become established, they have no assurance of life. He may let them rest in a feeling of security, but his eyes are on their way. For a little while they are exalted, and then they are gone. They are brought low and gathered up like all others. They are cut off like heads of grain. If this is not so, who can prove me false and reduce my words to nothing? So now Job is responding to Eliphaz and explaining to him that God does take care of things in his own time. It's not like he and his friends thought that immediately God would destroy these people. He said, no, God does this when he's ready. I want to go back and look at this question that he brings about when he talks about they are like foam on the water. And I want to give thought to just what does that mean, foam on the water? Well, there are two things that causes foam on the water. There's activity or movement, and there could also be some kind of chemical or a reaction of some substance that creates the foam. And here comes the point of this that Job is trying to make by talking about this foam, is that the foam does not happen without some type of activity that drives the foam. You need movement by wind or something to stir up the water, and whatever's on it creates now this foam. When we think about this, what is Job's point? Well, if you had just the foam with no water, that wouldn't work. The foam isn't more important than the water. The foam needs the water. The water can exist without the foam, but not the other way around. So what Job is saying is that as the foam on the water is there for a very short time and then it's gone, so it is with these rich, with these people that do this. They too will be there only for a short time. It may seem like it's going to be long, but it isn't. And soon they will be gone. Now, in this chapter of 24, we find now what Job is telling Eliphaz is that God does not answer to any man. God does what God wants to do, no matter what anyone thinks of it. And here it is, the theological question of the world. The reason most people read the book of Job, searching diligently for the answer to this question. And what is the question? If God is all powerful and just, why is there so much injustice in the world? Well, I think this question brings with it three possible positions. The first position believes that God is made up in the mind of man and is just a figment of man's imagination. Therefore, they can care less about him and what anybody else thinks of him for that matter. The second position believes that there's a God, but he is weak and cannot do anything. He cannot answer our prayers. He cannot change our circumstances. Therefore, because this person believes God is weak, they are never disappointed by him. But the third position believes that God is who he says he is, that he is unlimited in his power, that nothing is beyond his ability. Everything is under his control. He is the creator and controller of the universe. And it's this group that struggles most with this question. Now, I know this question is on your mind, so stay tuned. Your answer is coming. But I assure you, not in the form you are expecting. So now we want to look at chapter 25 and see now what Bildad has to say. Now, Bildad is only going to speak for 6 verses. This is his last time talking. It's as if he's tired and he doesn't have any more to say to Job. And if it be so now, this is Job speaking, who will make me a liar? That was the last statement he made to Eliphaz. He's challenging anyone to prove to the contrary what he had just said. Job had now attacked the 3 main positions of his friends and had relied on facts in defense of what he said. He countered their arguments by saying, as a matter of fact, the wicked were prospered. Remember, his friends said that they weren't. They often lived to old age. The friends said that wasn't true. And then they die a peaceful death without any direct demonstration of divine displeasure. These are the things that Job is saying that counters what the friends say. He boldly appeals now to anyone to deny this or to prove the contrary. The fact is undeniable, and the controversy was closed. Now Bildad shows up in chapter 25, verses 1 through 6, and attempts a brief reply. But he doesn't touch the question about the facts that Job just stated, but expresses a few vague and irrelevant thoughts. We're going to read in just a minute about the greatness of God, and then it's silent. The theory which Bildad and his friends had so carefully built up throughout all of this argument, and in which they were so confident, has been overthrown by Job. Listen to the words of Bildad, the Shuhite. Dominion and all belong to God. He establishes order in the heights of heaven. Can his forces be numbered? On whom does his light not rise? How then can a mortal be righteous before God? How can one born of a woman be pure? If even the moon is not bright and the stars are not pure in his eyes, how much less a mortal who is but a maggot, a human being who is only a worm? You know, in many instances, what Bildad says is actually very correct. We are nothing in the eyes of God, and who can be great in his eyes? So now Job is going to respond to what Bildad just says. And he said, how you have helped the powerless. He's being sarcastic here. How you have helped the powerless. How you have saved the arm that is feeble. What advice you have offered to one without wisdom. And what great insight you have displayed. I think Job is a little fed up with them as well. Who has helped you utter these words? And whose spirit spoke from your mouth? The dead are in deep anguish. Those beneath the waters and all that live in them. The realm of the dead is naked before God. Destruction lies uncovered. He spreads out the northern skies over empty space. He spins the earth over nothing. He wraps up the waters in his clouds, yet the clouds do not burst under their weights. He covers the face of the full moon, spreading his clouds over it. He marks out the horizons on the face of the waters for a boundary between light and darkness. The pillar of the heavens quake, aghast at its rebuke. By his power, he churned up the sea. By his wisdom, he cut Rahab to pieces. By his breath, the skies became fair. His hand pierced the gliding serpent. And these are but the outer fringe of his works. How faint the whisper we hear of him. Who then can understand the thunder of his power? Job had experienced great aggravation in his sufferings from the position which his friends had maintained. I know I said this consistently throughout. I want to say it again. Remember, he's frustrated and aggravated at them. You can hear it in what he just said. And they showed up there to comfort him. How different this has turned. What we find here is that they have concluded in their minds that Job is nothing more than a hypocrite. So now he speaks to Bildad, and he ridicules Bildad's answer, claiming his words were a mixture of spitefulness and self-preference. Bildad should have argued to Job the comforts rather than the terrors of the Almighty. We're often so disappointed in our expectations from our friends, as I said, who should comfort us. But the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, never makes mistakes and never fails in what he does. So now, Job turns from controversy to the realities of the case and begins with a full acknowledgement of God's greatness, his might, and his mysterious nature. Bildad believed Job needed enlightenment on these points. Job may have thought it right to make one more plain confession or profession of his belief. I want to take you back for just a moment, if you don't mind, to another statement that Job made in the chapter 9, verses 4 through 18. It's a little bit of a lengthy read, but it again repeats what Job thinks about God. He said his wisdom is profound. His power is vast. Who has resisted him and come out unscathed? He moves mountains without their knowing it. He overturns them in his anger. He shakes the earth from its place and makes its pillars tremble. He speaks to the sun and it does not shine. He seals off the light of the stars. He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. He is the maker of the Bear in Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the south. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. When he passes me, I cannot see him. When he goes by, I cannot perceive him. If he snatches away, who can stop him? Who can say to him, what are you doing? God does not restrain his anger. Even the cohorts of Rahab cowered at his feet. He's talking about not Rahab, the Rahab that we know of, or thinking of. He's actually talking about Egypt, when he took the children out of Egypt. He said, how then can I dispute with him? How can I find the words to argue with him? Though I were innocent, I could not answer him. I can only plead with my judge for mercy. Even if I summoned him and he responded, I do not believe he would give me a hearing. He would crush me with a storm and multiply my wounds for no reason. He would not let me catch my breath, but would overwhelm me with my misery. And he also said, and we're going to end here with a similar speech about God that he was answering to Zophar in chapter 12, verses 9 through 25. He said, which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. Does not the ear test words as the tongue tastes food? Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding? To God belong wisdom and power. Counsel and understanding are his. What he tears down cannot be rebuilt. Those he imprisons cannot be released. If he holds back the waters, there's a drought. If he lets them loose, they devastate the land. To him belongs strength and insight. Both deceived and deceiver are his. He leads rulers away stripped and makes fools of judges. He takes off the shackles put on by kings and ties a loincloth around their waist. He leads priests away stripped and overthrows officials long established. He silences the lips of trusted advisors and takes away the discernment of elders. He pours contempt on nobles and disarms the mighty. He reveals the deep things of darkness and brings utter darkness into the light. He makes nations great and destroys them. He enlarges nations and disperses them. He deprives the leaders of the earth of their reason and makes them wander in a trackless waste. They grope in the darkness with no light. He makes them stagger like drunkards. This is the God that Job served. This is the God that Job said, I have not uttered anything against him with my lips, nor will I. I want you to go back and read those passages a few times, Job 9 and Job 12, because they put in perspective the God whom we serve. I think sometimes mankind forgets who God is. And we see these things happen in nature and just call it Mother Nature. But it's not. It's really Father God doing what he does to show the world that he exists. And the unfortunate part of this, as we close, mankind still refuses to acknowledge his power and his presence. We invite you to come back and be with us again next week. As we continue our study in Job, we will take up at chapter 27. Until then, be safe and blessings to you.